This is the Cubs-related podcast presented by CubsInsider.com. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan, and we are coming to you with a special edition here over the All-Star break. Obviously, if you are a devoted listener of the Cubs-related podcast, you know we had an episode drop on Monday morning, and we have another for you today to fill the void left by there being no Chicago Cubs baseball over these few days, while Javi, KB, and Wilson are representing the Cubs in Cleveland. And on today's special edition, as I mentioned in the last episode, we are going to delve into a topic that we don't really touch on that much outside of kind of the big names and the obvious storylines, and that is the Cubs minor league system. And we have a special guest here with us today, and this one is actually a long time coming, someone we've been talking to for a while about coming on to the show, and you know, that was just kind of based on our following of his Twitter account and the way that he engaged with the readers and viewers on Twitter and stuff as it related to the conversation around Cubs prospects, and that is a nice segue into his handle. It is at Cubs Prospects, and that is Bryan Smith, who, since we started talking to him, is now the minor league writer at BleacherNation.com. So, Bryan, we're finally doing it. You're here on the podcast. We are talking minor league baseball with the Chicago Cubs.
Well, Corey, thanks for having me. But, you know, I listened to Monday's episode this afternoon, and Corey said, and I quote, "I guess today's episode will be special." So he damned me with faint praise in the previous episode.
Wow. So getting called out a little bit right there, Corey. You know, Bryan, if it was me, I would have said demonstratively that this was a special episode. But then, you know, that's Corey being Corey.
I know.
You guys
I was going for super special.
Yeah, I am very excited to have Bryan here. Like I said, we've been kind of chatting in DMs on Twitter for a long time. But I think everybody that listens to this podcast knows that my affinity does not lie much in minor league baseball at this point in my life. So I do have to. I guess I was just being reserved in my excitement, but we are very excited to have you here, Bryan, and we're going to talk a little, you know, Cubs system, and like I said in that last podcast, you know, we usually go for about an hour, and we've got a series to preview and recap, and certainly in a season like 2019. Plenty to talk about as it relates to the Major League Chicago Cubs, but with these few off days, and Brendan and I, look, if we could have recorded a special edition where we talk more about how we don't like Daniel Descalso, but we thought we would break it up a little bit and give you something a little bit different. Yeah, we're gonna seize the opportunity here and go with something different. So, Bryan, I think a good place to start, and I mentioned this to you, and I think our listeners know this, that I'm kind of coming at this from the perspective of I've got a surface-level knowledge of the Cubs system. I know the big names, I know their trajectory, I follow along, but I can't rile off some of their stat lines. I can't always give you a projection for when I think they're going to arrive at the major leagues and things like that, which I think is a position that Brendan can occupy. So we're coming at things from like a different ends of the knowledge spectrum here. But I just wanted to start with kind of a general question from where I'm sitting. It seems as though in 2019 it has been a good start for this system across multiple levels. Some guys, you know, some names that I'm seeing very frequently. It sounds like progress is being made in a lot of positive ways. Is it fair for maybe a casual observer to say that the 2019 season so far has been a good and productive one for the system as a whole, and that, you know, maybe people who aren't paying attention as deeper to this can be encouraged by a lot of what's going on?
Yeah, I think the nice thing is the top prospects have started to take care of business. I think since sort of Ian Happ and Adbert Alzolay got to the major leagues, the top of the system was really bad in 2017, 2018. It just, the Cubs didn't have a top 100 prospect, it seemed like. And now I think they firmly have one. They probably have 3 or 4. And pretty much everybody who's in that top 6, top 8 of the system has had a pretty good season. So that's been nice to see after a couple of years where it looked pretty bleak.
So, Bryan, in 2018, it felt as if some of the big names, at least I was following, didn't necessarily take that productive step forward. And one name in particular is Aramis Aidman, who I feel as if going into 2018, there was more focus on him. 2018, he didn't necessarily live up. I don't even want to say live up. He didn't progress, I think, in many ways a lot of people thought he would have. But in 2019, I look around and I see generally the system as a whole taking productive steps. You have Miguel Amaya taking productive steps, Brennen Davis, Nico Hoerner back from injury, Alzolay, etc. So is there any one particular reason why you think this year compared to 2018, you're seeing more names finally take those steps forward?
I think they're just better players. I think Aidman and Jose Albertos and Oscar De La Cruz, they were sort of the top of the system by default, but at the end of the day, they weren't particularly good prospects. And we were just reaching and hoping more than anything else, where now, Nico Hoerner, Brennen Davis, Miguel Amaya, these are legitimate prospects, more what we're accustomed to in the past. And their success is just sort of what happens with top prospects as they start to mature.
Well, and so Bryan, I think let's start with a couple of guys who we have already seen their impact or, their presence be made on this MLB roster. And I think those two names are obviously Adbert Alzolay and Robel Garcia. Let's start with Alzolay. And for someone that's been following along with his career and, was obviously anticipating him finally getting that shot, what were your kind of main takeaways from his few outings here at the major league level? What anything that looked different? I know in that first outing he was getting that changeup to work a little more. That kind of seemed to be throwing some people for a loop. Like where did this come from? Can it be this effective? What how is he going to use it going forward? And given that he's obviously sent back down prior to the All-Star break here, what do you see his role going forward for this team? And I think further, there's a little bit of debate, like, do you want him to come up and be in the bullpen if there's not a starting spot available, maybe when Cole Hamels is healthy and ready to rejoin this rotation? Do you prefer, he's got to be starting, it doesn't matter what level? Where do you see the kind of rest of the 2019 season for Adbert Alzolay?
I think at a certain point, what the major league team needs has to win out, right? I mean, if we're all about having the best 25 guys on the roster, I think Alzolay is probably a better option than Brad Brock or even Tyler Chatwood. And, hopefully at some point he's trusted to do that. But I think it's worthwhile to have him work out some of the things he learned in Iowa for a couple weeks here and wait to see what you have to do with that fifth rotation spot. As for what I saw in the majors, I mean, you nailed it, Corey. That changeup was really surprising. I think I wrote in my preview before his first outing that I wouldn't be shocked if they just ditched the changeup and went fastball, curveball in that first outing to keep things easy, and then they made me look stupid really quick.
Yeah. So, Bryan, you look at the changeup, you look at the curveball and the fastball, but again, the changeup, at what point in his career did he start to develop that? Because like you, I'm reading almost exclusively that fastball curveball combination is going to carry Alzolay, but that changeup is pretty nasty, man. And the fact that he was going to that pitch so often suggests he has some comfort with it, which I think is encouraging for any young pitcher who's throwing 3 pitches with high frequency early on in their careers.
Yeah, I thought his changeup was a lot better last year in 2018. I thought that was probably the biggest story of his 7 or 8 starts, whatever it was, in AAA. It was overall kind of a disappointing season for him, but I thought the changeup did make some progress. But this season, early in the year, the story was that curveball. I think Jason McLeod talked about him and Theo in the draft war room watching his start in New Orleans, which I watched that start too, and he threw like 60% curveballs, and they were insane.
Yeah.
And Brennan, you probably know better than me, but I think in the majors, I think he was showing like a 3,000 RPM spin rate, and it should be pretty good, but it just wasn't that impressive in the majors. I thought his feel was pretty bad. He left it up a lot.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't know, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, his RPMs around 3,000, top 5 to 10% in Major League Baseball for right-handed curveball. So that's pretty remarkable. And the trajectory of that curveball, it almost looks like a slurvy type pitch, where it doesn't have that 12-6 break. It's almost, it's weird. It's almost like a slider action, so to speak. And there were some instances, maybe I'm off base here, but I felt as if there was almost two types of those curveballs. One that is slower, one that's a little bit faster. Is that just me not seeing things properly, or does he actually throw two types of different curveballs?
I think that he started throwing a slider this year. I think he had the slow buildup in Arizona and spent a lot of time in the pitch lab, and I think that he started messing around with a slider. I saw it in one minor league start, I thought for sure, but not really consistently. So yeah, we'll see where that breaking ball goes. But for him to be any sort of successful as a starter in the long run, he's going to have way better feel for that, and I think he will. That's, in my opinion, that's his best pitch usually. It just wasn't the case in those 3 big league outings.
All right, so moving to Garcia then, we obviously see Robel come up. He has that first start, hits a homer. He's a double away from the cycle in his first major league start. Gets the Cubs the only run in that game on Sunday with a bomb, and so I think you're seeing that immediate impact, and we've obviously on this podcast been long kind of discussing, if you're not getting production there, you might as well reward a guy that is performing like this in the system. You might as well take a shot that he can provide a little something different. We know about the K rate. We've seen the K rate. What do you think the long-term viability here is? I know it's easy for people to kind of see these first couple games. He's hitting home runs, and I think the game on Sunday is going to stand out for him because he provides the only offense. So in this kind of area we're at with the Major League Cubs, wondering what's going on with the offense on Sundays, why aren't they hitting Ivan Nova, for example, on Sunday? When you get that kind of instant injection, I think it's easy for people to run away with the idea like, oh yeah, like we want Robel out there all the time. Screw these other guys. Like, let's just give him a shot. What do you think like the viability of that is? At the very least, do you think that he can stick on this team for the rest of the year, even if it's just in a bench kind of platoon capacity? Do you think it's possible he just takes a stranglehold on that second base job? What's your honest gut reaction to how it plays out for Garcia here?
I mean, I think the fun thing about Robel is that we honestly have no idea what he could be. I mean, anybody who says they have any opinion on his long-term viability, I think, is kidding themselves, because the guy was playing in Italy. I mean, I think the Cubs first maybe saw him in the Netherlands in a European tournament last year, and then they saw him in Arizona playing against the lowest rung of the minors. I mean, it's just one of the craziest stories I've seen in 20 years of following the minors. I still can't even wrap my head around the fact that he's here and he's hitting home runs. So
right.
It's just wild. I don't really know where it goes. I would think that maybe, David Bodie last year might be a decent proxy, but he's probably even going to be more extreme than that, where when they start finding these holes, and I think he'll have a similar hole with fastballs up high in the zone, that he'll get exploited quickly. But hopefully he can give us 5-10 more homers before we reach that point.
What do you think about his defense, Bryan? Again, only in a few outings at second base, I wasn't particularly impressed by his defense, but I'm curious if that's just a byproduct of him being nervous and just, only 2 games. But where do you come at from his defense?
A lot of people very quickly, when he started playing this season, went to he's a negative defender, and it seemed so early that I hadn't quite gotten there with analyzing him. And when I saw him, it was kind of a mixed bag. It seemed like if he had a play, like a line drive play right at him, his instincts were pretty good. He had a couple highlight plays, and when he had a little more time, he screwed things up a little more. So I don't know. I think he'll probably factor as a negative defender, but the fact that he can play 4 positions, maybe, even if something horrible happens and he had to play shortstop in extra innings, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I mean, he's more valuable for his versatility than what we're actually going to get from him defensively.
So is second base his best defensive position, in your opinion?
It's the one he's most comfortable in. I think the best play I saw him have in the minors all year was starting a 3-6-3 double play in like his third or fourth game at first base, and that definitely made me wonder what that would look like long term. But I'm certainly not hoping he's the Cubs' first baseman in the future.
Yeah. If we get to that point, we might have some other issues to address. You know, those are the guys we've obviously seen the impact. So I want to transition to a couple other guys. Bryan sent us over, kind of his rough top 25 here, and I think we're going to focus on some of these top 5 names, near the list here. And the first, kind of similar on that second base path, I think it's a good transition to talk about Nico. And I think we've certainly talked about Nico Hoerner on this podcast before. I think even if you are kind of just a casual observer of the Cubs system, Nico's probably, if you only know a couple names, I would say that's probably one of them. But I think his development, he's recently back from that injury, kind of gets right back after it, showing his hit tool pretty much immediately when he gets back on the field. But I think the topic of conversation around him is already starting to, and I think it's likely to only continue to heat up when you're looking at a team that kind of isn't getting that production from one of the middle infield spots. And I think obviously it's a quick trajectory, but the easiest question to ask here, Bryan, is Nico someone that can be an impact player for the team right now? I think you have a lot of people asking what the Cubs should be doing at second base. We're hearing, the trade rumors start, and we heard both Theo and Jed talk about position player depth being kind of one of the key areas that they need to and that they can address as we go over the next few weeks here to the trade deadline. And, we've all seen Ian Happ before. We know that it's been kind of an up and down trip down to the minors for him, though he's in the middle of a really nice hot stretch. And so I think Nico's maybe one of those other names where if people are reluctant to look outside of the Chicago Cubs organization, he's going to be one of those names that people wonder, can he do that? So I guess that's the question, or is it just too early and is that too fast of a progression for someone that you obviously have big plans for in the future?
Well, the fun thing about us doing the pod now is that yesterday on Monday was literally his first ever game playing second base outside of Arizona.
Well, that's how we plan it.
Yeah, right. The pod was 4 months in the making. Of course, we were just waiting for Nico to play second base.
Well, that's why we delayed it so long, yeah.
And so I think that tells you that the Cubs, at least in the back of their minds, are open to that possibility. He's played so little this year that it's going to be on him. If he starts going like crazy, they're not going to – I don't think they'll hold him back. I don't think they're that worried about stunting his development. He doesn't seem to be that type of kid. But I also think that the overwhelming likelihood is that, this was a guy who wasn't the best hitter in the Pac-10 14 months ago, or Pac-12, whatever we call it now.
It always changes.
Right. It'll be Pac-20 soon enough. But asking him to be ready for the majors after 75 minor league games or something is crazy, but this has kind of been a crazy season and you just never know what happens. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but my guess is that he's probably in Double-A until September. He probably goes up to Iowa to play in the playoffs for the Iowa Cubs. I know a lot of teams like to do that with prospects, is get them into a playoff atmosphere, and then who knows, maybe we get into mid-September and they want that pinch runner, and he's probably one of the fastest guys in the system, so he'd be a good fit there. But my guess is we probably don't see him until May or June of next year.
So for Nico's power, when he was with Stanford, it didn't appear as if he was going to be a guy who's going to slug a lot. But in his time with the Cubs, surprisingly, I think he's going gap to gap more this season in limited time. In only 86 plate appearances, he has 2 home runs, but he's just showing more pop than at least I expected. Was there any change that he made since being drafted that he's made with the Cubs to have more power? or is this just kind of his natural progression, you think, getting bigger, getting more comfortable as a professional, or am I just reading too much into his power?
No, I think you're right. I mean, it's crazy. He's played something like 40, 45 games with the Cubs, and he already has more home runs in the Cubs system than he had in 3 years at Stanford.
Yeah.
Stanford's known as a place that really messes with swings and does not encourage the loft angle movement. And so I think the Cubs, it was probably a pretty easy transition of just trying to get him to get the ball a little more in front of him, keep his bat in the zone a little longer, and just let his natural strength. He's a really strong guy, so it should come for him. I don't think we're looking at 30 home runs, but he should be a guy that is able to hit 15, 20 home runs, I would think.
Any particular player comps? I've seen a few compare him to Whit Merrifield, just in terms of that speed, that contact, some moderate power, and of course the second base position. Is that a fair comparison, or are you thinking of someone else, or what do you got?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I think if you think he's going to hit for power, I mean, remember those good Aaron Hill seasons? He's sort of similarly built to Aaron Hill.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But yeah, I mean, I think Merrifield's not a bad example. He's probably stronger than Merrifield. He hasn't stolen as much, even though he's pretty quick. I kind of wish the Cubs would have him just try to steal more bases, because when he had that inside the park home run earlier in the season, it was a speed that is elite. I mean, that time is probably a 70, 75 grade on the 20 to 80 scale, wow. But he doesn't really steal bases, so you kind of have to knock him down a little bit.
Wow. So in terms of his best attribute, right, his hit tool, power, speed, defense, where in particular would you rate his overall hit tool on an 80 scale?
I think that he's probably I think you'd project him to be a 60 if you're being sort of cautious. I think that's his best tool. I think we're kind of hoping that he's the leadoff guy of the future, somebody who can hit 300, walk a bunch of times, have that 380 or so on base. I mean, I think part of the reason that Cubs fans have already endeared themselves so much to him is that he could fill that guy we've been looking for since Dex left. And everybody's so convinced that if you find a leadoff hitter, the lineup suddenly gets better. And
right.
If that's the case, then Nico might be the guy that saves everything. So that's the hope is that he's better than 60. That he's 65 or 70, but that's asking an awful lot.
All right, so I want to move to a name, and this, I guess you guys could correct me if I'm wrong here, but again, coming from, the perspective of a kind of casual observer, a name that seems to have exploded here, that I don't know how many, Major League Cubs fans are aware of this guy yet, but correct me if I'm wrong. It seems to be the name that has moved the quickest up the list and finds itself kind of at the highest point here, and that is Brennen Davis, someone drafted in 2018. He's only 19 years old, and I'm looking at his baseball reference page here, and I notice, and maybe you guys can help me here, but for some reason his birthday is November 2nd, and that date just sticks out to me for some reason. A guy on the Cubs, November 2nd. I know they're playing the All-Star game in Cleveland. It's like rushing to me. It's on the tip of my tongue. That's right. That's the date the Cubs won the World Series in 2016. There it is. So, Bryan, tell me about Brennen Davis, a 19-year-old kid. But when you shot over your prospect list to us, he is firmly at number 2 behind Nico. And when I look around at, like the guys like Todd and Greg at Cubs Insider, they're talking about him. You're talking about him. He just appears to be that name that, maybe wasn't on people's radar before, but it sure seems like it should be now.
Yeah, I've been telling people if you read a prospect list that doesn't have Brennen Davis in the top 100, then you should no longer trust that as your source, because
wow.
What he's doing is crazy. when he got drafted last year, I opened up his scouting videos. I'd never seen or heard of him before, and I couldn't believe that the Cubs were going to give, more than $1 million to a guy with his swing. It was such an awful swing. I can't even tell you.
Wow.
And he's 6'4", and he was probably 160 pounds then. And I thought this is going to take years for him to have any offensive success. And then fast forward to January, and some videos come out, and he's added 30 pounds, it looks like. His swing's different. And then I saw him in March. Riley Thompson was having an awesome start against a bunch of the A-ball guys for the Cubs, and the only guy that I think got a hit against Riley Thompson was Brennen Davis, who hit the right field fence on the fly, had a triple at the end of that game. And the amount of distance he's covered developmentally in under a year is just something you don't see very often. And now you can see what that scout was dreaming on, and it's just a ceiling that the Cubs probably haven't had in the system since Eloy.
Wow. Any expected timeline that you can consider realistic for Davis? He's going through the system fast this year. Depending on how advanced the Cubs think he is Double-A early on in 2020 a realistic shot, or what are we looking at here for an expected timeline?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think he's in low A now in South Bend, and he'll probably finish the year there. And I think with a kid coming out of high school that still has a long way to go, I think he's just going to be a one level a year guy. So you're just hoping Myrtle Beach in 2020, Tennessee in 2021, and then hopefully the Iowa to Chicago transition goes a little quicker in that 2022 range.
Got it. So the one name that came to mind, and I think I'm crazy here, but it's still sticking with me, is he reminds me of like Michael Morse, in that he has a low follow-through for a big guy. His arms are kind of outstretched. And I know a lot of guys will cringe when they think of Michael Morse because his career was not as elaborate as one would want from an upcoming prospect. But any other player comparisons, and we like to do this player comparison game just because it gives listeners and a lot of fans a visual of what kind of to expect. But for me, that was my first reaction was, that low follow-through for a big guy reminds me a lot of Michael Morse.
I'm cringing. I can tell you.
I'm sorry. Someone has to cringe, yeah.
I think just a lot will depend on his body development. I mean, he's probably added 25 pounds of muscle. He's probably 6'4", 190 now, but will he get to like 210 or will he get to like 230? I mean, if he gets to 230, he probably has Derek Lee's body type.
Ooh,
and then
I like that.
Maybe you could dream on something like that offensively. If he doesn't get that big, if he stays a little skinnier than a player like Sean Green was, kind of jumps out. Sean Green, of course, was a left-handed hitter, and I hate making comparisons when guys aren't sort of hitting from the same side, but it's that kind of just easy power and could probably steal a bunch of bases, even though that won't be the main part of his game. That sort of reminds me of that type of guy.
All right, so let's move to, I think, a couple names that we found at the top of the list, and as we get to the trade deadline here, I do want to start to get your feelings, Bryan, on names you are maybe considering aren't going to be there in a month, and maybe names that you are scared are going to come up in some of these talks, and maybe these aren't the right guys, but when I look at two names like Miguel Amaya and Brailyn Marquez, they seem to stick out as names I'm hearing when I read these articles, and you go to MLB trade rumors and stuff, or when you're just talking to people putting these made up hypothetical trades together. I feel like that's kind of the territory I end up seeing a lot. So these guys, again, at the top of your list. And so just tell us a little bit about Amaya and Marquez, their development so far. And, are they guys that you are coveting, like protecting at all costs as we go over the next month here? Do you expect that their name is going to come up in some of these conversations? Where are you, kind of as someone watching all of this, and I think, maybe growing perhaps a little more attached to some of these guys and their development as we head to the trade deadline here. Who are, some names that you're maybe a little scared you're going to see come across that ticker that, the Cubs are moving for somebody else?
Yeah, the thing about those two guys, Miguel Amaya and Brailyn Marquez, is the bummer about trading them now is that they'd probably be valued as, guys at the very end of a top 100 list.
Kind of like an Isaac Paredes type thing where they traded him for Justin Wilson. Was it 2 years ago now?
Yeah, I mean, I think of, maybe even Dylan Cease when he was in the Quintana trade. I mean, Marquez is in a really similar spot. I think they both, Cease had made 13 starts in South Bend. I think Marquez has made 13 in South Bend. So they could be valued pretty similarly. The reason that I would be bummed about them getting traded now is I just feel like there's more, their value will be higher in a year. I think that there's a good chance that either one of them or both of them blossoms into top 50, top 30 prospects, and then your return, if you ended up trading them, could be much higher. So it would seem to me to just be selling a little early. I mean, Marquez hit 101 on the gun in his last outing. He's probably the second hardest throwing lefty on the planet.
So does that mean that he eventually is destined to a bullpen slot? What about his secondary pitches? What is he showing? What is he developing? And what's the likelihood that he can go through the system as a starter?
Yeah, they're trying hard. I mean, when you watch him, it's kind of annoying because he throws a lot of secondary stuff. It's just like they're not letting him let the fastball eat as much as you want him to. You just keep watching and saying, throw it again, throw the four seam again, and it doesn't happen. I think they're deliberately making him throw that stuff and really seeing if he can come along as a starter. But it's going to be very tempting to get him to the bullpen quickly. I think I have his numbers right here. He's got a 443 OPS allowed against left-handed hitters, and it's 870 against righties. So that just, that's another number that would just suggest that he could be that sort of elite lefty reliever. But he's a kid who just really started having success last year, and he's got a long way to go, and he's got the body type of a starting pitcher. So you might as well keep him there for a little while longer and see what happens. But yeah, that'd be a bummer to trade him now, and then in a year he's a top 5-8 pitching prospect, and everybody would be talking about how Theo, made the mistake trading the prospect again, right, even though we were all calling for it now. So it's just sort of how it goes, I guess. Miguel
Amaya right now, he is batting .221, but his walk rate and strike rate are incredibly appealing. So he's walking at a 13% clip, and he's striking now under 20% of the time with 7 homers in 261 plate appearances. He's a catcher too, right? And he's been graded pretty favorably for his defense. But at least in his short term with the Cubs and in his minor league stints, the batting average necessarily has not been there. But the strikeout rate, the power, that suggests some of the hit tool, the natural instincts are there. Where do you see him as an offensive player? Is this some guy who's just going to walk a lot, hit for power, and not be that quote-unquote high BABIP guy? And in addition to that, defensively as a catcher, how do you rate him defensively? From framing, from his pop time to second base, etc.?
Yeah, so he's in Myrtle Beach right now, the high A team, and that's one of the hardest minor league stadiums to hit in across the country. It's right next to the ocean, and you get that wind coming from the ocean, and it's pretty tough. And so even though he's got a OPS just over 700, he has a WRC plus 10% above league average, and the craziest stat of all probably is he's had 261 plate appearances, and just 2 of them have been against players younger than him.
Yeah, it's insane.
So that is wild. And for the record, he walked in both of those plate appearances. So he's just so young, and to be doing that as a catcher, I mean, it's very rare for somebody to be catching in the Carolina League at his age. So to be above league average as a hitter, I think speaks really highly. When I see him, I really think that he could blossom into being at the top of the home run among catchers list one day. I could definitely see him being a 25 home run guy. But we're going to not see that this year in Myrtle Beach. So you're just dreaming that it happens in Tennessee next year, or when he gets to the juiced baseball in Iowa the year after that. And
yeah.
So I don't know. That's another guy that if you trade now and you value him as a number 100 prospect, if he's a number 25 prospect in a year and he's got 15 home runs at the break, you're going to be kicking yourself.
Maybe this is a silly question, but just given that he's a catcher, obviously he's only 20 years old, and, you've kind of gone on that, this may be a pretty, year-by-year progression for him. Again, as we head toward the deadline and the Cubs are kind of looking around for what to do, does his being a catcher with Wilson Contreras in this organization, does that factor in at all, or is Amaya, too far down the line where you're, letting him do his thing, and the fact that, you have a young catcher who's kind of cemented himself in that job at the major league level doesn't really factor in yet?
Yeah, I'd be curious what you guys think. I mean, would you guys want to pay Wilson Contreras' contract after his team control runs out, when he, then you're paying him into his mid-30s? Is that a contract that you guys are hoping for?
Man, on the spot. All right. Honestly, I don't know. I'm always concerned, especially how the Cubs have been using Contreras the last 2 years now, about how well he ages. He's catching way more innings than your typical catcher. And the bat right now is hot, and you want to protect that bat. I would like to see at some point, and I think we may be seeing it in the second half, Contreras get some spots in left field and right field and see if he can become a more versatile type player. We saw that a little bit in 2016. But the bat that Contreras has developed into, it's appealing, right? So I think the conversation to extend him, regardless of whether or not Amaya is still in the system, they're justifiable. Whether that means they're going to keep him at catcher, we know some of the inconsistencies with his framing might be an issue, but he still has a great arm. I don't know. I don't know if I'm at the point where you want to extend him, but having his bat in the lineup consistently, even if he's not your catcher by 32, 33, there's still some appealing traits that he can bring beyond just a catcher position.
Yeah, I think Wilson certainly earned, I don't think Miguel Amaya should factor into the decision about what to do with Wilson Contreras. I think the Cubs' projection of Wilson by himself in a vacuum probably should weigh a lot heavier. And if they decide to just let his team control years play out, or maybe extend him just 1 or 2 years beyond that or something, that'd be great, and maybe Miguel could fit in. If not, then he wouldn't. But I don't think it's a situation of Dan Vogelbach's hitting a bunch in Iowa, but Anthony Rizzo, who's just started his sort of team controls in the major leagues. This isn't quite that situation where we actually kind of have a timeline that actually could work out. I mean, maybe you break Amaya in almost like Wilson broke in 2016, and then when Wilson leaves, Amaya takes over. Or, maybe we get another year along and you just think Wilson's going to be here, Amaya is blocked, and you trade him then. I don't know.
Fair enough. So I do want to continue kind of talking about pitching and just the overall state of pitching and pitching development in this system. I think, obviously, especially in the early portion of this season, you saw kind of, I guess, one of the consequences of the Cubs' lack of pitching development, something that is, often written about and talked about and gone over ad nauseum, in the various publications over the years here. But with the bullpen early in the year, you kind of are looking at it saying, man, I really wish we were able to inject some young, maybe hard-throwing guys that we developed, rather than, kind of putting together this ragtag group of minor league options and spring training invites and whatever they were doing in the beginning there. Do you think that the organization as a whole has made strides in the pitching department so far in 2019? And, I guess again, kind of from the casual sense, should fans be encouraged by where the state of pitching is relative to maybe years past, or are we still kind of looking around going, what are we really doing here? What's kind of your feeling on pitching in the deeper levels of this organization?
I think that it's definitely gotten better. I think where you would be happy is that the depth is there, and that you just hope that if you have 15 arms that classify as prospects, that you're going to be able to develop 2 or 3 of those into major leaguers. And I think that's sort of more where we're at than, outside of Alzolay, you don't have a guy who you're just like, that's definitely somebody who's going to have major league success. I'd love to say that there's somebody, but I feel like, I would have thought Dylan Maples a year and a half ago when he just began that ascent in, I guess it was 2017. You saw him and you were like, that's there. He can't miss. And then just the control just never improved. And so it's hard to see if anybody's really going to break through, but there are enough names that you think that somebody will.
What's up with Brendan Little, right? So the Cubs, they flipped the script a little bit and went pitching in their top few picks for the first time we've seen in recent years. But it looks as if Little has not progressed at a pace that's honestly kind of acceptable for a top-round pick. What's going on there?
I think that we would be a lot better off if in that draft, in hindsight, Corey Abbott and Keegan Thompson were drafted first, and Alex Lang and Brendan Little were drafted 3rd and 4th, because I think that Lang and Little are just they provide so much angst to the fan base, because it's just like that was a time where we started to realize, wow, they aren't developing pitchers, and now they just drafted 2 pitchers in the first round
right.
And they both kind of stink, and now we're just fully panicking, and Little's kind of the embodiment of that. But he looked really good in Arizona, rehabbing from a lat injury this spring. He's probably long-term going to end up in the bullpen, and he could do something there. But yeah, I think that first-round pedigree really hurts him, just because everybody uses him as an example why Jason McLeod hasn't drafted well enough.
So, and it goes back to the point, too, and Corey and I have discussed this exhaustively over the past year now with the Cubs pitching development, but it seems as if they're still, grasping at an organizational theme of how to develop their pitchers. And kind of the hallmark was early in those mid, 2010s, draft college pitchers, draft a lot of them, see who works out, and get them to the league really fast. But we're kind of seeing a little bit of a different approach now, where they're taking more of a high risk, and that's what Jason McLeod was talking about at the Cubs convention, for example. Is one particular philosophy, and it seems like these are like extreme philosophies where you only go college pitchers and you only go high risk guys. But in your opinion, with the way the Cubs have been developing pitchers within just the last year or two, is there a noticeable shift in what they're doing philosophically? And is there any particular worry or angst that you have right now in that they are shifting some of their philosophy? What's your state of how the Cubs have developed pitchers, how they're going to continue to develop pitchers right now? And as someone, for me, that does have a lot of angst over their lack of pitching development, how do you feel about this?
I think they've definitely changed significantly in the last couple of years. I know Tyson Miller's probably the biggest breakout pitching prospect they've had on the farm this year.
Yeah, you've been tweeting about Tyson Miller a lot.
Yeah, I know Tyson's been a big joy this year, and what he says is a big reason for his success is they've provided him in Double-A with a ton more scouting reports, a lot more numbers about his pitch tendencies and situations, and it's allowed him to vary up his sequencing a lot more. And now they're using a lot more numbers to show him what his pitches are doing, and sort of bring that pitch lab in Arizona to every minor league affiliate and show guys how their pitches are working on each day. And that infrastructure has really come a long way, and you hear it among the pitchers in the system a lot. They talk about how much more information they have than they used to, and I think that's great. I think it'll help the low upside arms that they drafted for a few years, and I think it'll really help some of the high upside arms that they've drafted the last couple. I think that we're really early in saying that Theo and Jason can't draft pitchers. I think, some of the pitchers they drafted in the second and third drafts they had there are sort of blossoming right now. And so I think we got to give it time. I think, maybe in 5-6 years, Jason McLeod will be long gone to another organization, and we'll start to have some pitchers show up, and we'll say, wow, he actually knew what he was doing after all.
So if you had to name your top, let's say 5 pitchers right now, it might be kind of difficult, number 3, number 4, number 5, but top 5 pitchers right now, who you naming?
Okay. I'll throw out Alzolay because we've already seen what he's doing, and Brailyn Marquez we already talked about, but the upside on his arm is ridiculous. I mentioned Tyson Miller. He's somebody who's not going to be a future ace, but the Cubs have a 5th starter job that they don't know what they're doing with next year, and if you told me in the second half next year Tyson Miller's the 5th starter, I wouldn't be totally shocked. He's an innings eater. He's a guy that grinds through a start, and he sort of uses that high spin pitch tunneling. That's sort of how he succeeds. He doesn't have the raw stuff of a lot of guys, but he knows how to outthink a hitter. Going past him, Corey Abbott is in Double-A as well. He's had a lot of success. He could also be a guy that comes and gets to the back end of a rotation. And then if you're going a little further down, you're getting Keegan Thompson. I feel bad. I keep saying back end of rotation, but that's sort of what the Cubs have, is they just have a lot of guys who that's what they're projecting to. And if you want to go high upside, you're looking down in the lower minors to guys who haven't pitched very much, like Giovanni Cruz or Richard Gallardo. And but in terms of guys at high A or Double-A that we might see in the majors soon, it tends to be guys who you're hoping for a team with championship ambitions is just the 5th starter, or a guy like Dakota Meckes in Triple-A, who is a reliever that I think really could contribute to the bullpen next year, but he's not going to be a guy who pitches in the 8th or 9th inning. He's a guy that's going to pitch in the 5th or 6th.
Any lost hope in Jose Alberto's? I know he's been struggling. He was a guy several years ago that was on top of many even scouting Cubs pitching lists, but you look at right now, and he just can't command his pitches. His walk rate in A-ball is over 8 batters per 9 innings. It's been a consistent issue with him. I know he's had some arm issues as well. Is the time past looking at Alberto's as someone who can lead the Cubs pitching prospect list?
Yeah, I think it has. He's got the arm to be a really good pitcher, but I think projecting him to make it to the major leagues right now it's just asking too much. Let's just hope that he can throw strikes for 40, 50 innings in the minor leagues, and then we can start to dream again, almost like Dylan Maples, right? Dylan Maples is a guy that the Cubs gave $1 million to out of high school, and it looked like they were going to release him, and one pitching coach said, let me try something with him, and all of a sudden he's in Triple-A knocking on the door, and that might be what you see with Alberto's, is just we're hoping that at one point something clicks and all of a sudden he's a reliever.
Well, so Bryan, I want to finish here with, maybe just, getting back to like a couple broad questions, I suppose, and, maybe they've come up over the course of this podcast, but is there one name, a couple names that you would look at and say, if you don't pay attention to the Cubs system, maybe not for right now, maybe not even for a few years here, but this is a name you need to learn. You need to learn it now, because down the road, you're going to start seeing it on these lists, and you're going to remember, hey, that guy Bryan from Bleacher Nation said you got to pay attention to this guy. Who's a name like that, or who are a couple names like that?
Yeah, a guy I'm excited about right now is this guy, the third baseman in South Bend right now. His name's Christopher Morel. Mm-hmm. And in his last 40 games, he's hitting like 330. He struggled a ton in 2018. He started in Eugene and was so bad they sent him back to Arizona. But he's really talented. He's probably this system doesn't have a lot of quick twitch sort of Javi Baez like guys, and he's sort of the one guy that you can kind of see underneath that umbrella where he thinks one step ahead of everybody on the field, but he's also constantly making mistakes and looking ridiculous as well. But when the bat hits the ball, it's pretty fun what tends to happen. So he's a guy that you never know if he walks a little more, or if his instincts just keep outpacing the pitchers he's facing. He could be somebody down the line that does some pretty special things. But I think for the casual observer, I think you just I think it's a lot of fun to dream on what Brennen Davis or Cole Roeder, another outfielder in South Bend, could be. I think those are the highest upside guys in the system, and I think there's a good chance that at least one of them turns out to be a pretty big deal.
Any concern about Roederer's numbers right now? So as it stands, he's batting .219. He's got a weighted on base average 304, WRC plus 89, and his strikeout rate is 26%. He's only 19 years old. Any concerns with his performance, or is this just the nature of young guys going through the system at that level?
Yeah, I'm not really concerned. I think that the Cubs showed a lot of confidence in starting him in South Bend. Usually what they do is they let April pass and they keep the guy in Arizona, and then they bring him when the weather warms up. And Cole had such an impressive spring training that they thought, really for the first time for a prospect in like 12 or 15 years, a high schooler going right to the Midwest League, they decided to challenge him. And yeah, he struggled a lot. He was not used to playing baseball in 40 degrees. He's a Southern California boy. So we'll see. I think it's too early to be worried. I think he's starting to do a little better. He had a nice June. He had a cycle at the end of June that really helped bring his numbers up a little bit. But I think at the end of the year, I'm hoping that his WRC plus is a little closer to 100. Maybe a little above it, and then I think he'd be on a fine trajectory to sort of be what we're all hoping he will be.
So with this recent Cubs draft, for example, they picked Jensen with their first pick. They followed up with Strumpf with their second pick, bat out of UCLA. What are we looking at with those top two picks, in particular with Jensen being that pitcher? Some have reported that he doesn't have the type of easy, free delivery to stick as a starter. He's more likely destined to the pen, as some have suggested, but I'm curious about your thoughts on Jensen and then, of course, with Strumpf as well.
I've loved a lot the last 2 years when we watch the draft and the Cubs pick a guy that other outlets don't even have in the top 100, and everybody freaks out and says, what the hell are the Cubs doing? And then Nico Hoerner looks pretty good now. And so I thought with Jensen, he wasn't a guy that I had any idea who he was before the Cubs drafted him, but I watched a couple of his starts and I was really impressed. He's got a great arm. He's a short kid. He does not look like a traditional starter, but he's throwing 98 with ridiculous movement.
Wow.
And I think there's a really good chance that he is a diamond in the rough, and that was a really nice scouting job, especially getting him under slot so you could draft a couple of guys above slot in the middle rounds.
All right, so Bryan, maybe just one more question for you here, and I kind of brought this idea up when we were talking about Marquez and Amaya specifically, but as we head toward the trade deadline here, give me one name and one name only that you desperately do not want to see in those reports. The Cubs have acquired fill in blank position player here for blank. Who is the one name in this system that you absolutely do not want them to move under any circumstances?
Brennen Davis.
Okay.
I think he has the highest chance of being a top 10 prospect before he reaches the major leagues, and to trade him now would be a mistake.
That is a pretty definitive answer. That was quick and definitive. Exactly what I was hoping for here. So before we let you go, obviously in a second here, we'll have you tell everybody where to find you and your work. But do you have like a brief, since we've spent this hour here talking about the minor league system, do you have like kind of a brief sentiment on what's going on at the major league level? Are you optimistic as we get ready to start the second half here in a few days? Pessimistic? Have you just, I'm going to focus on these minor league guys and let the Cubs kind of figure out whatever it is they're doing up here? Where do you land on the big league boys here?
Yeah, I mean, I live in East Lakeview. I have season tickets in Section 320R. So, as much as I write about the minor leagues, I'm right in the stands, screaming at men left on base, just like everybody else. I think if it was me, I'm not as into the idea of acquiring high-end players as much. I thought what they did at the deadline last year, even though it didn't work out, was great, right? I mean, Jesse Chavez and Cole Hamels, especially at the cost for the system, was a perfect way to do it. I think, we look back at Jose Quintana instead of Justin Verlander. I know there were a lot of other factors at the time, but sometimes getting that second rung name at a lower cost just tends to be the better route. And that's how I feel about this team. I don't think this team necessarily needs a high-end trade guy to win the division. I think they just need to play better. And I think they're capable of it. I thought in mid-May that this was the best Cub team that I'd seen since 2016, and obviously sentiment has changed a little bit since then, but heck, they're still in first place. You never know.
Fair enough. I mean, we're all trying to figure out exactly how to feel about that too. So I think that's a fair way to look at it. And honestly, I do think that's kind of the route we probably end up going. I think a similar approach to last year, where you're trying to add that talent, but maybe not pushing all the chips in, might be what we see. But Bryan, this has been a fun discussion. I think it was cool to delve into these topics, and we bring up a lot of these names on the podcast, either because they're coming up in trade talks or because they're coming up in just their performance, and the questions abound as to whether they can help the major league team. So I think it was good to be able to delve into this a little deeper and get into the specifics with some of these guys. But tell our listeners where they can find you, social media. Obviously, we mentioned Bleacher Nation, but give us the sell here.
Sure, I'm at Twitter on Cub Prospects, Cubs singular prospects. And I'm at Bleacher Nation. It's July, so Brett's having his blogathon fundraiser. So, any support that you guys could give Brett in that, I think, would be really appreciated. And, looking forward to the second half and listening to you guys start to have your moods improved.
Well, hopefully. And I got to say, too, when Bryan first started tweeting and he thrown out all this material and content, I'm like, wow, like who is this guy? Bryan does phenomenal stuff. So if you're not familiar with what he does, go please do yourself a favor. Give him a follow. Again, at Cub singular Cub Prospects, and you're going to learn a lot about the system. I've already learned so much in this first half of the year, not just about the guys in the top 5 or top 10, but those lower level guys, like even like Chris Morel, for example, and the trajectory he's been on. So Bryan knows a lot about this. So again, do yourself a favor, give him a follow, and you're going to learn a lot about the Cubs minor league system.
My only goal is to win Corey over by 2020.
Hey, you got me, man. I mean, I'm following along. I told you. I've learned a lot from following along, and very appreciative. I think, sometimes with some of the prospect guys all over the major leagues, I think it's hard to have an easy discourse with some of the writers and, big prospect guys. I think, sometimes they're a little set in their ways, and just not as easy to converse with. So I think the way that you go about things on Twitter has been very helpful. I look forward to those performers of the day every day. And, that's kind of where we're gauging, like I said at the beginning, some of these names I just continue to see and see and see. That's definitely one of the places I am seeing them. So I would say you've won me over, but there's definitely just a threshold of prospect coverage and talk that I doubt I'm going to exceed again in this lifetime. But we'll see. You never know. We all need goals, I guess. So, but that I think is all we have for you. So that was a minor league special edition of the Cubs related podcast. And as we've talked about before, kind of when we did that Craig Kimbrell one the first time, I think this is, something Brennen and I may look to do going forward here, where we have the opportunity to get on here when we're not doing anything. And maybe we can have a guest to give us some insight. Throw that out there. And, we're still going to do the regular 2 episodes every week before and after every Cubs series that they play. But this does allow us to kind of delve into things that we otherwise, just don't really have time for on the regular episodes. So give us some feedback. If you guys liked this kind of extra content and us being able to jump into other things and branch out a little bit, let us know. And then we will certainly, obviously make it a priority to do more often going forward. But I think especially with the minor league system, we'll definitely make it a priority to check in regularly if you guys are receptive to this kind of bonus content. But otherwise, we will come back to you one more time during this All-Star break, and we will set the stage for the second half of the 2019 season, hopefully setting the stage for the Cubs getting ready to win the NL Central and get themselves back into the playoffs in dominant fashion. I think that is the ending that we are all hoping for here, but as you guys know, we will be here with you no matter what. So whatever the range of emotion Brendan and I need to occupy, we will certainly do that. But again, I for my own health, guys, we need a different ending than 2018. It's just not good for Brendan and I on a physical and mental and emotional level. So we will set the stage for that. We'll look back, maybe at some highlights of the first half, top performers, disappointments, etc. And then it will be time to kick this thing into gear. We are on a collision course with the trade deadline and the stretch run of this season in an NL Central that is very close. So stick with us. As always, we thank you guys for joining us here on the Cubs-related podcast. We will talk to you again soon, and whether we are talking about the Cubs at the lower levels or the major leagues, go Cubs.